Chicago once lifted its buildings without stopping daily life. Its river was forced to run backward, and beneath its streets lies a second hidden city. Chicago is not just skyscrapers and deep dish pizza. Let's dive into 50 incredible facts that will change how you see Chicago. And the last one is crazier than you think. 50. Chicago's nickname comes from an insult. Chicago is called the Windy City, but not because of the weather. In the late 1800s, Chicago was competing with New York to host the world's Columbian Exposition. New York newspapers mocked Chicago's civic leaders, calling them windy politicians who were all talk and no substance. The insult stuck. Ironically, Chicago isn't even that windy compared to other American cities, but the nickname became part of the city's identity. The Windy City became a symbol of ambition, hustle, and a willingness to fight for recognition. 49. The city was lower than the lake. When settlers first arrived in the 1830s, Chicago was essentially a floodplain. The land sat only a few feet above Lake Michigan, and during storms, the water would flow backward into the streets. The streets turned to mud so deep that horses drowned in it. The low elevation meant sewage couldn't drain away. It pooled in the streets and seeped into the drinking water. The city's location was economically perfect, but geographically, it was a disaster. 48. They raised the entire city 4 to 14 feet. Between 1855 and 1865, Chicago raised itself. Engineers jacked up entire buildings using thousands of jack screws operated by teams of men. While the buildings hovered in the air, workers poured new foundations underneath. Some buildings were raised 14 feet. People walked into their first floor businesses and found themselves entering from what was now the second floor. In some places, you can still find old storefronts buried below the current street level. 47. The Chicago River flows backward. Rivers don't normally flow backward, but the Chicago River does. Originally, it flowed east into Lake Michigan, carrying all of the city's sewage and industrial waste with it. This contaminated the drinking water supply and caused massive outbreaks of cholera and typhoid. In 1900, engineers reversed the river using a system of canals and locks, forcing it to flow west toward the Mississippi River basin. Stand on a bridge in downtown Chicago, and you're watching water defy its original direction. 46. Chicago's drinking water comes from 2 miles offshore. Even after reversing the river, Chicago needed clean drinking water. Engineers built a tunnel under Lake Michigan, 2 miles out from shore, and constructed a massive intake crib that sits in the middle of the lake like a small fortress. The crib pulls water from deep below the surface, where it's cold and clean. It was completed in the 1860s, long before modern tunneling equipment existed. Workers dug through limestone using hand tools and explosives, knowing that a collapse would drown them instantly. The crib still stands today, quietly feeding the city. 45. The Great Chicago Fire started in a barn on October 8, 1871. A fire began in a barn on the city's southwest side. The exact cause is still debated, but what happened next isn't. Chicago was built almost entirely of wood. The streets, sidewalks, and even water pipes were wooden. The fire burned for 2 days, destroying over 3 square miles. More than 17,000 buildings were reduced to ash. 100,000 people lost their homes. Within days, rebuilding had already begun. 44. Chicago invented the skyscraper. After the fire, architects had a blank canvas and a problem. The city was growing fast, but the land was limited and expensive. In 1885, the home insurance building became the world's first skyscraper, a 10-story structure built with a steel frame instead of thick masonry walls. Before steel frames, buildings could only go so high before their walls became too thick to be practical. Chicago became a laboratory for vertical architecture. The skyscraper wasn't invented because Chicago wanted to show off. It was invented because Chicago had no other choice. 43. The city has more movable bridges than anywhere else on Earth. Chicago has more than 30 movable bridges, most of them bascule bridges that lift like drawbridges to let boats pass underneath. The Chicago River cuts through the heart of the city, and in the early 20th century, it was crowded with ships carrying cargo. Fixed bridges would have blocked trade. Each bridge weighs thousands of tons, but they lift smoothly using counterweights and gears. Stand downtown during a bridge lift, and you'll see the street split in half, cars waiting as a massive steel structure rises into the sky. 42. Chicago was built on top of a wetland. Before Chicago was a city, it was a marsh. The land at the mouth of the Chicago River was so wet that Native American tribes called it Chicago, which most historians believe referred to the wild onions or garlic that grew in the swampy soil. The area flooded constantly, but it was also a perfect place to connect two watersheds. Traders realized they could portage canoes between the Chicago River and the Des Plaines River, which flowed toward the Mississippi. That short portage linked the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Chicago didn't succeed despite the wetland. It succeeded because of it. 41. The city used to be a major timber port. Most people think of Chicago as a steel and railroad city, but in the mid-1800s, it was one of the busiest timber ports in the world. Lumber from Wisconsin and Michigan forests floated down Lake Michigan and piled up in Chicago's river. At its peak, Chicago handled more lumber than any other city on Earth. The river was so clogged with logs that you could walk across it without getting your feet wet. The timber industry built Chicago's early wealth and infrastructure. Then the forests ran out. By the late 1800s, the lumber trade collapsed, but by then, Chicago had already moved on to steel, meat, and grain. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and leave a like if you're learning something new about this incredible city. 40. The Chicago portage changed North American history. The Chicago portage was a short stretch of land, less than 2 miles, that separated the Chicago River from the Des Plaines River. French explorers like Marquette and Joliet used it in the 1670s to travel between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. It was the only practical route connecting the two massive water systems. Control the portage, and you controlled trade across half the continent. When engineers built the Illinois and Michigan Canal in 1848, they followed the same route. The portage is gone now, buried under highways and suburbs, but it made Chicago what it is. 39. Lake Michigan is the only Great Lake entirely within the US. Lake Michigan is enormous. It's the second largest Great Lake by volume and the third largest by surface area. It's also the only one that doesn't touch Canada. This gave Chicago a strategic advantage as a domestic port. Goods didn't have to cross borders or deal with customs. The lake also shaped the city's climate, moderating temperatures but bringing lake effect snow when cold air blows across the warmer water. 38. The city's first permanent resident was a black fur trader. Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable is recognized as the founder of Chicago. He arrived in the 1780s and built a trading post at the mouth of the Chicago River. Du Sable was of African descent, likely born in Haiti, and spoke French, Spanish, and several Native American languages. His trading post included a house, a barn, a mill, and a bakery. It was the first permanent settlement in what would become Chicago. For years, historians downplayed his role, but today Chicago recognizes him as its founder. 37. Chicago sits on a continental divide. Chicago is one of the only major cities in the world built directly on top of a continental divide. The divide runs through flat, marshy land just southwest of the loop. On one side, water flows toward the Gulf of Mexico. On the other, it flows toward the Atlantic Ocean through the Great Lakes. This divide exists because ancient glacial ridges left behind 10,000 years ago carved the land into subtle hills. Most cities are defined by a single watershed. Chicago straddles two. 36. The 1893 World's Fair introduced the Ferris wheel. The World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 was Chicago's chance to prove itself on the global stage. More than 27 million people visited. George Washington Gale, Ferris Jr., designed the Ferris wheel as a response to the Eiffel Tower. The wheel was 264 feet tall and could carry over 2,000 passengers in 36 glass-enclosed cars. People were terrified and thrilled. After the fair, it was dismantled, but its legacy lives on in every amusement park around the world. 35. The fair also invented the Midway. Before the 1893 World's Fair, there was no such thing as a midway. The fair introduced a mile-long strip of entertainment, food, and attractions called the Midway Plaisance. It featured exotic villages, carnival rides, dancing, and sideshows. The Midway was supposed to be a sideshow, but it became the most memorable part of the fair. The concept spread to every carnival, fair, and amusement park. The word Midway entered the English language as a term for the part of a fair where the fun happens. 34. Chicago has a hidden pedway system. Beneath downtown Chicago, there's a network of tunnels and bridges connecting more than 40 blocks of buildings. It's called the Pedway, and most tourists never see it. The system was built gradually over decades, starting in the 1950s. It allows people to walk between buildings, train stations, and shops without stepping outside. On a freezing January morning, thousands of commuters use the Pedway to move through the city without ever touching snow. It's a hidden layer of the city, a parallel version of the streets above. 33. The Chicago River glows green once a year. Every year on St. Patrick's Day, the city dyes the Chicago River bright green. The tradition started in 1962 when a plumber noticed that a dye used to trace pollution leaks turned water green. The city's plumbers union decided to dump the dye into the river as a celebration. These days, the city uses a vegetable-based dye that's safe for the environment. A boat spreads the dye along the river, and within minutes, the water transforms. Tens of thousands of people line the bridges to watch. 32. Chicago's Union stockyards were the largest in the world. For nearly a century, Chicago was the meatpacking capital of the world. The Union Stockyards opened in 1865 and quickly became the center of the American meat industry. At its peak, the stockyards covered more than a square mile and processed millions of cattle, hogs, and sheep every year. The stockyards employed tens of thousands of people and made Chicago rich. Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle, exposed the horrific working conditions and unsanitary practices. The stockyards closed in 1971, but they shaped the city's economy, its labor movement, and its reputation. 31. Refrigerated rail cars were perfected. Higher Chicago didn't invent the refrigerated rail car, but it perfected it. In the 1870s, Gustavus Swift developed a reliable system using ice-cooled rail cars insulated and packed with ice harvested from frozen lakes. This allowed Chicago to ship fresh beef to cities on the East Coast. The refrigerated rail car transformed the meat industry and American agriculture. Suddenly, perishable goods could travel long distances. The system spread to other industries, carrying fruit, vegetables, dairy, and beer. Chicago became the center of a cold chain that connected farms to cities across the nation. 30. The city was rebuilt with fireproof materials. After the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the city learned its lesson. The new Chicago would be built with stone, brick, and steel. Wood was banned in many parts of the downtown area. The fireproof building codes attracted innovative architects and engineers who came to experiment with new designs. Chicago's post-fire architecture became famous for its boldness and functionality. The fire destroyed the old city, but it cleared the way for a new one, built to last. 29. Chicago has two airports named after war heroes. Chicago has two major airports, and both are named after men who died in war. O'Hare International Airport is named after Edward Butch O'Hare, a Navy pilot who shot down 5 Japanese bombers in a single mission and was awarded the Medal of Honor. He was killed in combat a year later. Midway International Airport is named after the Battle of Midway, one of the most important naval battles in the Pacific during World War II. Most cities name airports after presidents or politicians. Chicago chose to honor military sacrifice. 28. O'Hare was once the busiest airport in the world for decades. O'Hare International Airport was the busiest airport in the world. At its peak, it handled more passengers and more flights than any other airport on Earth. O'Hare's location near the geographic center of the United States made it ideal for connecting flights. The airport expanded constantly, adding terminals, runways, and gates. In recent years, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport surpassed O'Hare in passenger numbers, but O'Hare remains one of the busiest airports in the world. 27. The city has a reverse street grid in one neighborhood. Most of Chicago follows a grid system, with streets running north-south and east-west. But in one neighborhood called Streeterville, the grid is rotated 45 degrees. The rotated grid exists because the neighborhood was built on landfill that didn't align with the rest of the city. In the late 1800s, developers dumped debris into Lake Michigan to create new land. Walking through Streeterville, you notice that the sunlight hits the buildings at different angles. It's a subtle but disorienting reminder that Chicago's grid isn't as orderly as it seems. 26. Lakeshore Drive follows an ancient shoreline. Lakeshore Drive, one of Chicago's most iconic roads, runs along the edge of Lake Michigan, but it doesn't follow the original shoreline. Over the past century, Chicago has expanded into the lake using landfill to create new land. Parks, beaches, and entire neighborhoods now sit on ground that used to be underwater. If you walked along the old shoreline, you'd be several blocks inland from where the lake is today. The road curves and bends, following the contours of the original original shore, even though the shore has moved. If you're enjoying this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss more documentaries like this. 25. Chicago has more than 50 neighborhoods. Chicago isn't a single city, it's a collection of neighborhoods, each with its own character, history, and identity. The city officially recognizes 77 community areas, but there are more than 200 distinct neighborhoods. Pilsen is Mexican. Chinatown is Chinese. The South Side has jazz and blues history. Chicagoans identify with their neighborhoods more than with the city as a whole. When someone asks where you're from, you don't just say Chicago, you say Wicker Park or Hyde Park or Bronzeville. 24. The city's plan was designed by Daniel Burnham. In 1909, architect Daniel Burnham unveiled the Plan of Chicago, one of the most ambitious urban planning documents ever created. Burnham's plan called for wide boulevards, lakefront parks, and a system of diagonal streets to ease traffic. Much of his vision was never fully realized, but the parts that were built shaped the city forever. His famous motto was, "Make no little plans." The plan wasn't just about buildings, it was about creating a city that could compete with the great cities of Europe. 23. Chicago banned the sale of foie gras for 2 years. In 2006, Chicago became the first major city in the United States to ban the sale of foie gras. The ban was driven by animal rights activists who argued that force-feeding ducks was cruel. Restaurants hated the ban, some ignored it, others mocked it by giving away foie gras for free and charging for side dishes. 2 years later, the city council repealed the ban. Chicagoans love their food, and they don't like being told what they can or can't eat. 22. The city has a rat problem older than skyscrapers. Chicago has struggled with rats for more than a century. The problem began in the stockyards, where rats thrived on the waste from the slaughterhouses. When the stockyards closed, the rats didn't leave. The city fights back constantly with rat patrols, poison programs, and public awareness campaigns. But the rats adapt. Chicago's rat population is estimated in the millions. Every major city has rats, but Chicago's rat problem is legendary. 21. The Chicago River was once an open sewer. Before the river was reversed, the Chicago River was a toxic nightmare. Sewage, industrial waste, and garbage flowed into it daily. The water was thick, black, and smelled like death. The river's condition was a public health disaster. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery spread through contaminated drinking water. Thousands of people died. Reversing the river in 1900 moved the sewage away from the drinking water supply. Over the decades, pollution control slowly cleaned the river. Today, fish live in the Chicago River. Compared to what it was, it's a miracle. 20. Chicago has a tunnel system built for freight beneath Chicago's streets. There's another layer of infrastructure that most people never see. It's called the Chicago Tunnel Company system, built in the early 1900s to move freight underground. The tunnels were narrow, just large enough for small electric trains to haul coal, mail, and goods between buildings. At its peak, the system stretched for 60 miles beneath the city. The tunnels flooded in 1992 when a construction crew accidentally drove a piling through the tunnel wall near the river. The city plugged the leak, but the tunnels remain, forgotten and flooded, a ghost infrastructure beneath the modern city. 19. The Willis Tower was the tallest building in the world. When it was completed in 1973, the Sears Tower, now called the Willis Tower, was the tallest building in the world. It held that title for 25 years. The building stands 1,450 feet tall with 110 floors. Its design is iconic, 9 square tubes bundled together, rising to different heights. The tower was built to symbolize Sears, Roebuck, and Company's dominance in American retail. By the time the building opened, Sears was already beginning its long decline. On a clear day, you can see 4 states from the observation deck on the 103rd floor. 18. Chicago has a glass box hanging off a skyscraper. On the 103rd floor of the Willis Tower, there are 4 glass boxes called the Skydeck Ledge. They extend out from the building, suspended 1,353 feet above the ground. The boxes are made of glass on all sides, including the floor. When you step onto one, you're standing on transparent material with the city far below. The glass is 3 layers thick and can hold more than 5 tons, but that doesn't make it feel less fragile. The ledge opened in 2009 and quickly became one of Chicago's most popular tourist attractions. 17. The city has more than 200 theaters. Chicago has one of the most vibrant theater scenes in the United States. The city has more than 200 theaters, ranging from massive Broadway-style venues to tiny black box stages and converted storefronts. Many famous actors and comedians got their start here, including John Belushi, Bill Murray, Tina Fey, and Stephen Colbert. start. The second city has been training comedians since 1959. The Steppenwolf Theater Company is one of the most respected regional theaters in the country. Chicago theater isn't trying to be New York. It's doing its own thing, often rougher, edgier, and more experimental. 16. The Bean is not called the Bean Millennium. Park's most famous sculpture is officially titled Cloud Gate, but everyone calls it the Bean. The sculpture is a 110-ton elliptical structure made of polished stainless steel. Its surface reflects the city's skyline and the people walking around it in a seamless, distorted mirror. The artist Anish Kapoor hates the nickname, but it stuck. The sculpture was unveiled in 2006 and immediately became one of the most photographed landmarks in Chicago. It's become inseparable from Chicago's identity, a shiny object that somehow captures the city's self-aware, slightly absurd spirit. 15. Chicago invented deep dish pizza. Chicago's most famous food is deep dish pizza, and it was invented here in 1943. Pizzeria Uno claims to have created the first deep dish pizza. The pizza is baked in a deep pan with a thick buttery crust that rises up the sides like a pie. The toppings are layered in reverse order: cheese on the bottom, then toppings, then sauce on top. It takes 30 to 45 minutes to bake, and when it comes out, it's heavy, rich, and almost impossible to finish. Deep dish pizza divides people. Visitors come to Chicago and eat it once, and they remember it forever. 14. The Italian beef sandwich is more popular. Locally, tourists eat deep dish pizza. Chicagoans eat Italian beef sandwiches. The sandwich is simple: thinly sliced roast beef, cooked in a seasoned broth, piled onto a long roll, and topped with giardiniera or sweet peppers. The key is the dip. The sandwich is soaked in the beef's cooking juices until the bread is soft and dripping. The sandwich originated in the Italian-American neighborhoods on the south and west sides in the 1930s. There are dozens of Italian beef stands across the city, each with its own loyal following. 13. Navy Pier was originally a shipping dock. Navy Pier stretches more than 3,000 feet into Lake Michigan, and today it's one of Chicago's biggest tourist destinations. But it wasn't built for tourists. It was built in 1916 as a shipping and recreation facility. During both World Wars, it served as a naval training center where thousands of sailors were trained. In the 1990s, the city renovated it and transformed it into a commercial and entertainment complex. Navy Pier now draws millions of visitors a year, but many locals avoid it, seeing it as overrun with tourists. 12. The Chicago blues sound was born in migration. Chicago blues is one of the most influential music genres in history, and it was born from migration. During the Great Migration, hundreds of thousands of Black Americans moved from the rural South to Chicago, seeking jobs and escaping Jim Crow oppression. In Chicago, Southern blues was amplified, electrified, and transformed. Musicians like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Willie Dixon plugged in electric guitars and played in small clubs on the South and West sides. Chicago blues became the foundation for rock and roll. Without it, there would be no Rolling Stones, no Led Zeppelin, no modern rock music. 11. The city has a museum built underground. The Art Institute of Chicago is one of the best art museums in the world, but most visitors don't realize that part of it is underground. Millennium Park sits directly above a section of the museum. When the park was built in the early 2000s, the museum expanded underneath it, creating a modern wing with galleries lit by natural light filtering through skylights. It's a clever use of space in a city where land is expensive and limited. Walking through the museum, you can be standing on the third floor of a building and also be beneath a public park. 10. Chicago's lakefront is entirely public. Unlike many waterfront cities, Chicago kept its lakefront public. There are no private beaches, no gated mansions blocking access to the water. The entire shoreline is a chain of parks, beaches, and bike paths stretching for miles along Lake Michigan. This was a deliberate decision made over a century ago, influenced by Daniel Burnham's plan of Chicago. The result is one of the most accessible urban waterfronts in the world. The lakefront is Chicago's great equalizer. 9. The city almost became the capital of the US. In the mid-1800s, there was a serious proposal to move the nation's capital from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. Supporters argued that Chicago's central location made it a better choice for governing a rapidly expanding country. The idea gained traction, especially among Midwestern politicians who saw the East Coast as too dominant, but the proposal ultimately failed. The debate is a footnote in history, but it reveals how ambitious Chicago was. The city didn't need to be the capital. It was already already the center of everything that mattered. 8. Chicago has a magnetic attraction for conventions. Chicago hosts more conventions and trade shows than almost any other city in the United States. McCormick Place, the city's massive convention center, is the largest in North America. It sits on the lakefront, sprawling across multiple buildings with millions of square feet of exhibition space. The city's central location makes it a natural meeting place for people traveling from across the country. Every year, hundreds of conventions bring millions of visitors to Chicago. Chicago has always been a city where deals are made. 7. The city's flag is one of the best designed in America. Chicago's flag is simple, bold, and instantly recognizable. It features 2 blue horizontal stripes representing Lake Michigan and the Chicago River, and 4 red stars representing major events in the city's history. The flag was designed in 1917, and it's become a symbol of civic pride. You see it everywhere, on buildings, t-shirts, tattoos, murals, and storefronts. It's one of the few city flags that people actually care about. Chicagoans love their flag. 6. Chicago has a Christmas tree that floats. Every winter, a massive Christmas tree appears in the middle of the Chicago River near the Michigan Avenue Bridge. The tree doesn't sit on land. It floats on a barge anchored in the water. The tradition started decades ago, and it's become one of the city's quirky holiday rituals. The tree is decorated with thousands of lights and can be seen from the surrounding bridges and buildings. The floating tree is impractical, difficult to install, and serves no real purpose, but that's part of its charm. 5. The city was the birthplace of the skyscraper elevator. Skyscrapers wouldn't exist without elevators, and the modern safety elevator was perfected in Chicago. Elisha Otis had invented the safety brake in the 1850s, but Chicago's architects pushed the technology further. The home insurance building, the world's first skyscraper, relied on elevators to make its upper floors usable. Without them, no one would climb 10 flights of stairs every day. The elevator transformed architecture. It made vertical cities possible. 4. The city has a famously corrupt political history. Chicago's political history is legendary for its corruption. From the early days of machine politics to the reign of Mayor Richard J. Daley, the city was known for backroom deals, patronage, and voter fraud. Aldermen took bribes. Elections were rigged. The saying, "vote early and vote often," became synonymous with Chicago politics. Yet the city kept functioning. Streets got paved. Buildings got built. In recent decades, reform efforts have cleaned up some of the worst abuses, but the reputation lingers. 3. Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in America. Chicago is deeply segregated by race and income. The South Side is predominantly black. The North Side is predominantly white. The West Side is mixed but divided by neighborhood. These divisions aren't accidental. They're the result of decades of discriminatory housing policies, redlining, restrictive covenants, and economic inequality. Highways and industrial zones were deliberately built to separate communities. Neighborhoods that are only a few miles apart feel like different worlds. The city's diversity is real, but it's not integrated. 2. The city's population peaked in 1950. Chicago's population reached its peak in 1950 with more than 3.6 million people. Since then, the population has declined. People moved to the suburbs. Industries left. Jobs disappeared. By the 1970s and 1980s, parts of the city were in serious decline. In recent decades, the population has stabilized and even grown slightly as young professionals and immigrants have moved in, but Chicago has never returned to its 1950 peak. The city is smaller now, and in some ways, that's made it more livable. 1. Lake Michigan shapes everything. Everything about Chicago comes back to the lake. It determines the weather, the economy, the transportation, and the character of the city. The lake is why Chicago exists. It brought traders, settlers, and ships. It provided water, trade routes, and later, drinking water and recreation. You can't understand Chicago without understanding the lake. Stand on the shore, and you're standing on the edge of something vast and indifferent. The lake was here before the city, and it will be here after. Which fact changed the way you see Chicago the most? Tell me the number in the comments. And if you'd like to continue this journey, there's another video waiting on screen right now. Until next time, thanks for watching.